everybody, welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm doing another sewing project, specifically a quilt, specifically a new type of quilt that I've never made before. So I have been making t-shirt quilts for several years at this point, and every time I make a new quilt, typically you're only using either the front or the back of the quilt, or of the t-shirt, because that's where the design is, that's where what you want to remember is. And then most of the time, like the back of the quilt, or if it's just a little like shoulder logo, then like there's a ton of leftover t-shirt fabric of a solid color or of a fun pattern, and it's like you don't want to just throw that away because that's a lot of material. So I have been saving all of that over the last few years of making t-shirt quilts, and it's gotten to the point where I kind of have a ridiculous amount, and I really need to do something about it. So that's where this quilt idea was sort of born. What I am wanting to do, I'm sure the title of this video says it already, I am wanting to make a Pokemon pixel quilt where every single square of this quilt is like 2 inches by 2 inches square, and my hope is to make the finished quilt look like one of those pixelated images. So originally for this idea, I thought it would be cool to do all of the original starters for the Pokemon, which I made, like I spent a lot of time prepping this. Let me show you. So I had made this originally with all 3 of the original starters plus Ash's Pikachu, and I thought this would be so cool to make a quilt out of all 4 of them, and then, you know, you just have the background and the border and all of that. This quilt, did I write down on here, like, how ridiculously large this quilt would be? Yeah, this quilt would end up being, like, 8 foot long, which is ridiculous. That's way too big. And that's with every single individual square that's pixelated on these being 2 inches, 2 square inches. Originally, I thought it would be cool to do a quilt with all 4 of them, and then I thought, like, that is a lot. Maybe I should start smaller. So I've decided to make a much smaller quilt with just Pikachu right here. And that's what we're doing today. Now, I already went through and I added like sticky notes to that have all of the information I would need on them. Like, I like planning all of this stuff out in case you haven't noticed. I have already measured everything, so the final size of this quilt when I am done, I am aiming for 48 by 48 inches, which is basically a 4 foot by 4 foot square. It'll kind of be like a throw quilt, if you will. And I've also gone through already, and you can see right here that I've set aside all of the scrap fabric that I have. So these are all, most of it that I have is already like sectioned off into like colors. I've already like sorted it into colors. So we have like a bunch of yellow, and we have some brown and white and other yellows and black and red and stuff over there. So I have not actually started on this at all. I wanted to film this whole process because this is a very new style of quilt that I am doing. Like, in my head, it feels like it's going to be pretty simple, but once I actually start getting into it, I have no idea how simple or complex this is going to be. I am going to start by separating the fabrics as best as I can into like how much I think I'm going to need. So I do have written out how many square inches of each color that I need, and it gets tricky because there's like a lighter yellow and a darker yellow for like a shadow, which if I'm able to find lighter shades of yellow and darker shades of yellow to use for that, I absolutely will. But I have to start going through my fabric to see if I have anything like that. Because this is all scrap fabric, like, the shades of yellow will not be the same shade of yellow. This is going to be very much a patchwork, pixelated Pokemon pattern. So obviously I'm going to try to keep all of the colors as similar as possible, but it's not going to be identical or exact, and I'm okay with that. That's kind of going to add to the charm of this finished quilt, I hope. Let's get started, because I'm definitely going to be just figuring this out as I go. So you are going to be seeing me do mental acrobatics to figure out how to make this work. So here's the 4 main shades of yellow that I have. I think ideally I would like to use this for the lighter shade of yellow and this for the darker shade, and use these only like in case of emergency. The only issue is, looking at this and the notes that I made, I need 122 square inches and 130 square inches. I'll be fully honest, talking about all of these measurements in terms of square inches, I have a very difficult time knowing how much that is because I've never had to measure things in that measurement to this degree before. So I've never had to be like, oh, 122 square inches, that roughly is this amount, which would be, yeah, this would cover about a quarter of that or half of that. Like, I don't have that experience yet. So I think what I am going to start with is I'm going to set aside all of these 2 main fabrics that I want to use and separate them by what is already interfaced and what needs to be interfaced. And then I will interface what needs to be interfaced and get all of that. And then I'm going to start cutting this. Is it too early to cut? Change of plans already. I haven't even actually started anything yet. Oy vey. What I've decided to do is just start cutting what is already interfaced, because all of this is interfaced already. It was only a little bit that wasn't. So what I'm going to do is cut all of this to get an idea of how much I actually have. Like, how much does this make? How much does this cover? So I've taken my Pikachu off of the page before it. I just ripped it right off of there. And I redrew it, and I kind of gave myself a guide to go off of. So what I'm going to do then is start cutting all of the, like, the light yellow or the dark, one of the colors first. And as I cut off chunks, I'm going to take a pen or a pencil and like fill in that chunk. Like right there is filled in already because that's actually going to be like the background color. So I want to make sure I don't accidentally cut those little bits. So that's what I'm going to do, and just start working piece by piece to get all of this like cut and ready to go, and then I'll go from there, I think. Once I start cutting, do I need to start immediately sewing it to keep it all together? Do I need to be doing this like in a specific line? If I cut all of the dark yellow, but then the pieces get mixed up and I accidentally cut or start sewing them in the wrong order, then I'm gonna have to cut more and that's gonna be wasteful. How do I do this? Do I need to start with the black and just start going from like left to right? Maybe that's what I do. Maybe I go grab my black and see what I have there. Let's give that a go. This is what I'm doing, and I'm sticking with it. This is my template. This is my reference. I am going to start at the far left hand right here and just work my way from left to right, going in columns. So I am going to cut this piece of black, and if it's more than one individual square, I'm going to cut the row as one solid piece. So this will be 6.5 inches rather than 2.5, 2.5, 2.5, and then sewing them together. That's just gonna be a solid 6. So that's what I'm going to do. And then I will work on getting this whole second row done. And then I will sew second row and first row together. I just realized, but what if I need the background fabric so I can be sewing all of those strips together too? But I have enough of this blue. That's not a terrible background. I think I have enough of this because this is already getting close to 2 foot, and this just keeps rolling. This is gonna be my background fabric, it's decided. Okay, glad we figured that out together. All right, here's where I am so far. What I've done, you can see I have that much crossed off, but I don't have that much sewn. Also, I've numbered all of these columns from 1 going all the way over to 19. So this right here is column 1. And then I did sew together column 2. So that is what that looks like. Here is this right next to it, just for a little comparison. So that white is this white eye up there. So that's what that looks like. I was realizing that going back and forth between cutting these pieces in a single column and then getting my sewing machine back up and sewing those together and then moving my sewing machine so I could cut the next column, it was getting to be too much, and I knew I would get frustrated with the constant back and forth. So what I've done is I went ahead and I cut all of the pieces for columns 3 through 7, and I put them in this little drawer that I have, and each column is just separated by a piece of paper that has the number on it. And what I'll do is every like 4 or 5 columns worth of pieces, I will stop cutting, I will go through, I will sew all of them, just to make sure that I am not messing something up and getting my math wrong or something like that, because that would make me very sad. Once I have all of the individual columns sewn, then I will probably go back and work on adding, because right now I'm just doing the columns for Pikachu himself, not adding in the blue that is supposed to be on the outside of all of these. But once I do all of the columns for Pikachu himself, then I think I will go back and start doing the columns of blue that I need to connect all of them. All right, I am in the living room now because I just finished sewing all of the columns, which there is one that I made a mistake on that I have to go back and fix, but that's fine. That's why I am doing it this way. I have all of the columns sewn, and I've just laid them all out next to each other. And look at how cool this looks. Stand up so you can see it. Look at how cool that looks. This one right here that's like extra long, I accidentally made this patch of dark yellow too big. So that's why I have to go through and make that a little smaller. But look at how cool that looks. And then obviously the whole background will be this light blue that you see in here in spots. So that's just was there to complete all of the pieces. So now what I am going to do is once I go back and fix that one spot, I'm going to start measuring out the blue pieces to be as long as I need them. So this whole image is a solid square. All of the sides are squared off, because once it is fully squared off, then I can go through and start sewing them all together. So the reason I haven't sewed them together yet is because it will make it a nightmare to sew together later if everything's all like wonky shapes. So I'm gonna fix that one and start cutting the blue so I can sew those to the columns, so I can then finally sew the columns together. All right, it is a couple days later. What I have done, I took the first 5 columns in order and I sewed all of the blue to them. So you can see all of that, and then I sewed it on the top and the bottom. So now, I know this isn't gonna be totally in shot, but now they should all be like the same length all together. And what I'm going to do before I sew all the rest of the blue to the top and bottom of all of the other columns is I'm going to sew these 5 together and make sure that I am actually doing this correctly. Because this quilt very heavily relies on all of these seams lining up. Because if it doesn't, Pikachu's gonna look deformed, and we don't want that. So I am gonna go ahead and pin this like crazy and then sew these 5 together, and hopefully it looks good. These 2 are sewn together. I'm fairly happy with how they look, but I I realized a big thing that I forgot to do that I had every intention of doing before I started sewing these columns together is ironing them. So I need to go through and on the other 3 columns that I have right there, I need to iron all of these seams flat so I don't run into that, which that's fine. I'm not worried about that. So I need to iron all of those flat. That way when I sew them together, it's going to lay nicer. And then when I have those all sewn, I will lay it out and like sew this whole seam flat as well. Okay, I don't know if you'll be able to see the whole thing with this angle. Actually, I'm just gonna move you right now. I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna put you right there. Here is the first 5 all put together. Oh yeah, look at that. So you can see the whole beginning of Pikachu. I'm very excited about this. I think this looks so awesome already. So here it is so far. And this is, I think, roughly what the size of the quilt is going to be. Very much just like a throw size. Hi, Lambeau. But that's what it looks like. Far away, fantastic. 1,000,000 out of 10. Close up, all of the seams definitely don't line up as much as they should. They definitely could line up better. But for this being all of the seams that I have to line up, I am very happy with the amount of seams that are lining up really nicely. So what I'm going to do now is I think I'm going to do another batch of 5 columns, get the blue on the top and bottom, and sew those 5 together. Then I'll just have a bunch of like batches of, I don't know, basically I'm just gonna keep repeating myself of sewing the blue to the ends and then sewing all the columns together. That's basically all I'm doing, but I'll show you progress. All right, I cut all the other pieces. Here is his butt all finished. I am not going completely in order, so I now have the front half of him and the back half of him totally done. Here is strip number 3 all put together, and the last strip all put together. So now it is time to start sewing all of these together to get the final image. I don't think you're ready for how cool this is. I love it. Like, look at how cool, just look at the back! The back is so cool! Okay, how awesome that is. Oh my goodness, Dan, come look at this.
Okay, I'm coming. Oh!
Isn't it cool?
That is so killer. Oh man. Do you need me to hold it up for you, or?
I can see it. I can see it just fine in my
Oh
camera
my goodness.
Right now. Isn't that cool?
Oh, I love it.
I love it too. Oh my gosh.
It's the way in which, like, it so effectively translates, like, the classic video game, Pikachu, Pokemon kind of stuff that's just, that has that pixelated stuff, but then, which, I mean, really, it only gets better as you move further and further back.
So the further away you are, the cooler this looks.
So,
a couple things I still have to do with this. Clearly, it is not like finished. This is still just the front. I do need to add like more strips to the sides because you can see like the black right here ends and there's supposed to be blue going all the way along the sides. So I do need to cut more of that, but I need to measure this and find out how big this is and how much I still need to add. And then I also need to add blue on this side as well. I don't know if I need to add any more blue to the top or the bottom. Those might be good. Once that is done, then I just need to pick a border color and a back and start sewing the layers together, which is very exciting. So last I filmed, I'm pretty sure it's been a little while, I just needed to finish the outside pieces of the front of this to make it like completely finished. Is that right side up? That's upside down. So I have gone ahead and gotten the rest of the blue that I needed along the outsides. You can see there. So let's see, there you go. You can see the whole quilt all finished. Well, the front of the quilt all finished like that. So now comes the fun part of sandwiching it and sewing it all together and calling it good. And I've been procrastinating because the top sewing is gonna take a lot. I'm doing a lot of top sewing on this quilt. Jumping back, for those of you who don't know how to make quilts and don't know all of the terminology, when I say I'm going to sandwich this quilt, what I mean is I'm going to put all of the layers together. So this is the quilt top, or the quilt face. This is the very front of it. I've picked out this yellow, which it looks like obnoxiously yellow in the camera. There you go, it's less obnoxious there. It is a pretty bright yellow, but that's pretty true to Pikachu. So I wanted it to be pretty yellow, and also just to kind of like complement the blue that's in there a little bit. So this is going to be the back of the quilt. And then in the middle of the quilt is going to be batting. Batting is this material that goes in the middle of the quilt, and that's what gives your quilt its warmth. So I don't know why I'm like bending over so much. I could just sit down and save my back. So I have these pieces of batting, so I'll need to see what fits. I want to use these up first because I do have an absolutely massive roll of batting right there. But if I don't have to cut into that massive roll, I don't want to. So I'm gonna see if I can just like sew these together to get them to be the size that I need them to be. I think I'm going to sort of sweep up my floor in here so I can lay all of this down on the ground, size it how it needs to be, sew together any parts of the back and the batting that I need to make it all the right size, and then we can start pinning the whole thing together. Alright, so this is an issue I was a little afraid I would have when I bought the backing. I didn't want to buy too much fabric, so I bought what I thought would be enough that I could like line it up and cut off the excess and use the excess for the last bit. And I'm looking at it. I don't know if that's enough yellow to cover that. I'm gonna cut it and like piece it together and see if I can get it to fit. I hope it's enough. I really don't want it to be too crazy piecemeal. I have an audience. I had that much left over. That was cutting it very close. The whole thing is all pinned together. So what I am going to do now is go through and start top stitching the whole thing. Hello, Lambeau, how are you? And I'm going to start by stitching in the ditch, is what it's called, where basically you take all of these existing seams already and you just stitch right in that line. So I'm gonna do that every single ditch of every single column, from the top all the way to the bottom, the whole thing. And then when I'm done with that, I'm gonna turn the quilt sideways and I'm going to do the exact same thing for all of the rows. My hope with doing that is it'll help complete like the pixelated look that I'm going for. All right, I am now to the point where I have the entirety of my vertical lines on this quilt sewn. So now I have to go through and sew all of the horizontal lines. I'm gonna take this ruler to kind of match up where the seams from these lines mostly line up, and I'm going to use my air-soluble marker to go through and mark all of the columns that don't have a seam So when I go over to sew them, I can follow that line from my marker and make sure that everything stays a straight line. Because I have a lot of columns that don't have seams next to each other, and if I don't have something to follow, my line of sewing is gonna get really crooked, and I am eventually going to get to the next seam and it's gonna be totally off and it's gonna look terrible. So I'm gonna start kind of in the middle and just kind of work my way around to try to help all of these line up. Okay, I just sewed the first line of horizontally, and I'm torn of whether I think it'll look really cool when it's done or if I hate it, which is why I only did one line to start, because I wanted to look at it and see and kind of gauge what I think would work. Let me show you what I'm talking about. You can see very clearly the horizontal line right there that I sewed. You can see it going all the way across really clearly. I don't know, from far away like this, it's not too bad. I don't hate it. But if, looking up closer, it's so clear on the areas where there wasn't a seam to kind of stitch in the ditch that there's thread going on top. And I would need all of this to be one color. I mean, you can see going these, where I came out of the ditch a little bit, but it's not that totally noticeable because this is still your focal point, Pikachu. But I fear that once I start doing all of these horizontal lines, especially with the blue and the black, right here, this was a seam, so you can't hardly see that white stitch right there, but there was no seam right here, so it's just fully top stitched and it's very visible. And I don't think I like this, because so much of the blue, these are gonna be visible lines, and I really don't think I like it. You don't notice it so much on Pikachu's body. I mean, you can see the purple right now from that air-soluble pen. That will disappear, and you won't be able to see that anymore. That, I am not concerned about. I'm not talking about that line at all. So maybe it's because I can see the purple right now that I don't think I like it nearly as much. I think what I'm gonna do is I'm going to leave that. I'm not going to sew anymore on the top. I'm going to let the air-soluble pen kind of disappear, and I'm gonna wait for Dan to come home, and I'm gonna get his opinion on it, because I think he will be able to help me gauge whether it's going to be worth doing all of those horizontal lines as well or not. Maybe what I'll do is, moving forward, when I do future quilts, I will make sure that all of the pieces are no more than 2 inches by 4 inches vertically, so that that pixelated look comes more naturally without having to do all of the horizontal stitching. And I'll still do all of the vertical stitching in the ditch, just to keep everything together really nicely and keep it looking crisp. But I don't know if doing all of the horizontal stitching is gonna be worth it. And I hope you guys understand what I mean by vertical stitching and horizontal stitching. When I say vertical stitching, I am talking about stitching up and down on the quilt in all of these seams, up and down the entirety of the quilt. That's what I mean by all the vertical stitching. The horizontal stitching is going, left to right on the quilt, like what I just did with this line. Gosh, and I don't know if I like it. All right, since we last spoke, all sorts of fun stuff has happened. So Dan got home and I showed him that horizontal line of stitching on the quilt. Oh, I shattered my nail, holy cow. And he agreed he didn't like it, that it didn't look good. It did kind of force all of the areas that already had stitching to pucker a little bit. It didn't look as clean, so I seam ripped that whole line. Wasn't that big of a deal. So then what I did after that was, because since I knew I wasn't going to be doing any more sewing on the face of the quilt, it was time to start getting it ready for the binding and finishing it. So I went through, and you can see you can see on the edges here, I went through and I cut all of the backing and the batting to be even with the front of the quilt. So everything is nice and ready for binding at this stage. I can't remember if I mentioned it earlier in this video or not, but my original plan for the binding of this quilt was I was going to keep it like very, very simple and essentially just wrap the back of the quilt around to the front of the quilt and sew that, and that would be my binding. Kind of like a cheating binding, but it still would be effective. When I was looking at the color schemes and thinking what best color would go around the front of the quilt for like that little binding border, I decided the yellow that I'm using for the back would probably fit best for the front as well. So that's what I was going to do. And then you saw when I was laying everything out to sandwich it all together, I very barely had enough backing to even cover the back of the quilt, let alone wrap it all around for the front. So what I did was after I cut all of the extra like hangover off of the quilt, I measured all of it, plus the little bit that I had left over from when I sandwiched everything together. And I measured it all, I cut it all to 2.5-inch strips, and I think I was within like the measurements that I calculated for how much I would need for this quilt. I think I had like 10 inches more for the binding, which kind of makes me nervous because I feel like I don't know for sure if I have enough or not, even though this binding that I made earlier, it's just held together by pins so it doesn't all fall apart. But although it measured 10 inches longer, sometimes my measurements aren't exact, so 10 inches for me is like cutting it really close with like having enough binding or not having enough binding. So like I said, I went through, I sewed all of the pieces together, and then I spent like an hour ironing all of it so it was all ready to go. And now I am to the stage where I can start attaching the binding to the quilt, which is a nerve-wracking stage. Also, it's a really exciting stage because once this binding is sewn, the quilt is done. So what I am going to do now is open up the quilt, start laying out and pinning my binding all the way around on it, and hope and pray my measurements were all correct and I have enough for the entirety of this quilt, because if I am short, I'm gonna have to figure something else out, and I don't really want to figure something else out, so I'm really hoping I have enough. We'll find out. I basically ran out of my little clips, but if I fold all this over, you can see I have enough. All right, so now it is time to actually start sewing it. That entire time lapse you just watched was me struggling with the binding and then finally stopping recording and giving in and looking up video because I realized I definitely did something wrong. I am so not used to making binding from scratch. So I had to look up a video and realized I did more steps than I needed to when I made the binding, so I was making it more difficult for myself than it needed to be. And that's what was causing all of the confusion. So I have it figured out now, and we can finally get to actually correctly sewing the binding on. All right. And here, oh no, here, there you go. Can you see it? I don't know if all of it's in frame or not. There is the finished Pikachu quilt, entirely done. I love it. Look at it. It's so cool. Definitely a huge learning curve on this quilt. Learned an absolute ton, and I am confident that I can move forward with making these much quicker and better, which is always a good thing. So this will be available on my Etsy shop. I'm not exactly sure when it's going up. There's a link to my Etsy in the description box if you want to go check it out. And there's also a link to my Etsy shop's Facebook page, which is where I will be posting when this goes up, so you will know ahead of time. And you can snag it for yourself if you want it, but also if you like this design and you would love a pixelated character from Pokemon or another just cartoon or another video game, I will happily do commissions of these. So this will be commissionable, probably for the same size and like style, so it'll be like very pixely like this. So if that's something you are interested in, head over to my Etsy page and send me a message there, because that is probably where I will be able to see it the fastest. And then we can talk details about size and price and all of that good stuff. But like I said, this will be on my Etsy page very soon. I am very happy with how it turned out. The back, I'll show you the back quick. It's just yellow. It's just yellow lines. There's nothing that exciting going on there. The front is all the exciting bits. You want to look at the front. That's the cool part. Look at how cool it is. It's so cool. I love it. Okay. But that is the end of this video. I hope you have enjoyed watching it. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you want to see other crafty type videos and vlogs from me. I hope you guys have had a great day. If you have any suggestions of quilts that you would be interested in seeing, whether it be a themed collage style quilt like I have done with the Packers and the Disney quilts that I have made on this channel, or whether it be with one of these pixelated type quilts that I just started doing, please leave those suggestions in the comments below, especially if you would be interested in buying one of them, because that would make me far more incentivized to make it sooner. But I hope you have had a great day, and I will see you in another video. Bye!